It's time for The Story Behind the Person, featuring lively, in-depth conversation with compelling guests from our community. And here is our host, Jonathan Van Bilsen.
Hello and welcome to this episode. My guest today is Marc Gibbons, the brainchild behind the Port Perry Petals, a fantastic fundraising event. We'll learn all about Marc's involvement as well as the story behind this highly motivated individual. We'll be right back after these messages.
Pet Value has a fleet of services to help you and your pets to live their very best lives. Visit Pet Value in Port Perry to discover a world of expertise, friendly staff, and everything you need for your pets. Pet Value, your pet, your store.
Love the community you live in, be proud of your town, and tell everyone. Port Perry Wearables. Toques, hoodies, blankets, and more. All from PP Print, more than just printing.
Welcome back. As I mentioned, my guest today is Marc Gibbons, the brainchild behind Port Perry Petals. Marc also has a wonderful story with a great ending that we're going to talk about. Marc, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So, digging back into your past a bit, I was quite surprised at some of the accomplishments you've had. Some fantastic accomplishments. You were born in Ottawa.
Correct, yes.
And lived there for, I guess, most of your life. In high school, you were into sports, right?
Yeah, I paddled, kayaked competitively, and I also skied downhill competitively. And yeah, I grew up in Ottawa and I spent my formative years there, and then moved to Montreal for school.
Right, you went to McGill?
I did, yeah. So I went and did my Bachelor's of Music and Master's of Music at McGill. I played the oboe. The oboe. Which is an interesting instrument, and I picked it in high school. I played the piano from a young age, and of course in high school you had to pick an instrument, and I wanted to pick the oboe. I always liked the sound, but also there was something very appealing of being the first one to play in the orchestra before the first violin or anybody else. You give the tuning A. So I thought that was pretty special, and since nobody else picked the instrument, I said, this is for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it a difficult instrument to learn?
It is. Producing a sound on the oboe is incredibly difficult, and of course as oboists and bassoonists as well, we have to make our own reeds from scratch. So there's almost a carpentry element to this musical instrument. So there's a lot of startup costs just in producing a sound, whereas you know, a piano, you just hit a key and it sounds about the same for everybody. Right. Yeah. So yeah, it is a bit of a challenging instrument.
I've been involved in a few orchestras, and I do love the sound of the oboe. It's very distinct, very different.
When it's played well, otherwise it can be pretty abrasive.
Like any instrument,
yes,
right?
of course.
But it's I guess it's just sort of different for someone in high school to play an oboe. I mean, I could see a clarinet or a piano or drums, that sort of thing, but an oboe, it's not a normal kind of...
yeah, it's a unique.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Very much so. And you obviously excelled at it. So when you went to McGill, you took performance?
I did, yeah. So it was a Bachelor of Music and Performance, specifically orchestral studies. So the program is aimed at training you to play in the symphony orchestra, which I eventually did.
So you played the oboe all the way through?
Correct, yeah.
So in Montreal, you played for, you said the Montreal Symphony Orchestra?
Yeah, so I did, I would sub with the Montreal Symphony. So if somebody was sick or that sort of thing, or they needed extras, I would be on their list. So I had the pleasure of playing several times with the Montreal Symphony. As I graduated, I played with several regional orchestras, Sherbrooke, Trois-Rivières, did some musical theater in Montreal, and as well in Southern Ontario when I moved out here, yeah.
So, so obviously you're bilingual.
Yes.
We could have done this entire show in French.
Yes, we could, but I don't know how that would have worked for you and your viewers, perhaps. But
the viewers more so than me.
Yeah.
I speak Dutch.
Okay.
So you have a minor, you took a minor in technology, right?
Yeah, so I picked a minor in music technologies, which was interesting because I've always written code from a very young age. And
so tell me, let me stop you on that for a sec. So, so how does a young kid get into writing code? Like, what is that something you just woke up one day and said?
Well, no, I guess I had a bit of an advantage. My father worked with computers and databases and that sort of thing, building websites, and at the University of Carleton. And so I was exposed from a young age. We had the internet, you know, very early on when it was just strictly textual, and you know, it was very much used to exchange, you know, university papers, and you know, seeing some communication with somebody in Australia was pretty mind blowing as a child, right, with a 9600 baud modem.
Right.
So yeah, I got into coding pretty early, went to like programming camps, and it's something that I kind of did as a side hustle, I would say, through high school and even university.
So when you said coding, are we talking like COBOL, or are we talking like copy star dot star?
Yeah, so I guess the first language was Turbo Pascal.
Okay.
And you know, in high school I did some C++, and then you know, got into PHP and some MySQL, and Apache was called the LAMP stack, so building little websites for sports teams or this and that. Just made a couple bucks on the side. So I had this kind of in my pocket, and I also produced music. I was really into hip hop, so I did some beats and that sort of thing. So the music tech was offered at McGill, so I kind of explored that a little bit.
And the music tech is writing music on a computer?
Yeah, it was more focused on processing of sound. So think of like programming applied to sound and synthesizing and distorting. It was pretty abstract, but yeah, there's some pretty neat things that were happening there. Yeah,
especially from a young age. I mean, that's amazing. You know. And you're also with the National Ballet of Canada. You play for them?
Yeah, I've subbed with the National Ballet here in Toronto, and yeah, I've played a bunch of Nutcrackers and various ballets, so I was kind of on their sub list as well.
Where else? Niagara, I think?
Yeah, I played principal at Niagara Symphony for a year. You know, doing pickup shows with Mervish, you know, variety, Hamilton Phil, you know, Kitchener, which unfortunately just folded recently, so some sad news there in Kitchener. So yeah, I guess I was part of what we affectionately call the 401 Philharmonic, and which, you know, just involves commuting all over the place. And I was also commuting to Montreal and various regional orchestras there. So it was very hard. I mean, it was exciting for a while, but living out of a suitcase has its challenges after a certain time. And you know, music and the arts is a tough field, and
it's got to be tough to make money too, like to make enough money to support your life.
Yeah, it's challenging, and you know, you supplement with things like teaching, which I did. I was teaching at St. Michael's College School in Toronto, and
were you teaching oboe, or
I was teaching the oboe privately, and I was also coaching their ski team there as well.
Right,
just
that
as
goes
happens
together, oboe ski.
Yeah, of course. Well, they're like, oh, we've got the ski thing, and I'm like, oh, well, I have my my coaching certification, so they're like, oh, why don't you come along? So that worked out, but it is a hard living, and I was taking auditions kind of all over the place, North America, all over the United States, and with you know advance and whatnot, but never landed the big job, and it became a little bit demoralizing after a certain time, and I decided that a life of poverty and
not what you wanted?
It was not what I wanted to do, and it didn't align with other life objectives like having a family and that sort of thing.
So if you go for an audition, let's say you audition in Phoenix.
Yeah.
Do you have to pay your own way to get there?
Yeah, that's all on your dime.
Really,
so it's not only flying there and the hotel and the expense and playing behind a screen for a few minutes and you either advance or you go home, but it's all the preparation to get there. So you'll be given a list of excerpts of the repertoire, and they'll ask you for just a snippet of that particular symphony. And you know, there are some common ones that are asked all the time, but there's a whole deal of preparation that's involved. And while you're preparing, I mean, you're refusing work because that's taking away from the focus and that. So it's kind of a double whammy that you've got an expense, and then you're giving up on income as well. So yeah, it was tough, and I gave it a good go, and I lived exclusively from music for a while, and then decided I would pivot. And
I imagine you get to a point eventually when you've done enough of it where they actually know you well enough that you don't have to do that auditioning. Or is that not true?
Yeah, well, for formal employment with a symphony orchestra, it has to go through a formal process. But in terms of filling in and doing pickup work and freelancing, then it's very much who you know and making a good impression, and then being invited back in the future.
And you said you play behind a screen. That's for so nobody can see you?
Yeah, so the behind the screen is to remove gender, race, or other factors from the audition, from the panels. So the intent there is to sort of make it blind to the judges.
Interesting. Very interesting. Very, very stressful, I'm sure.
It is, yeah. It certainly builds character.
Yeah, it does that. So then you went to the Brat Festival?
Yeah, so following, I finished my master's, and then it was, what do I do with my life? And I applied to the National Academy Orchestra, which is part of the Brat Music Festival in Hamilton, and it's a 16-week internship. And
Brat is named after Boris Brat, who's probably our most famous conductor in Canada, right?
Yes, he was a big deal. Yeah, very special person.
And I understand that you met a lady who was working at that festival.
I did, who would be my my future wife, Lauren. So yeah, she was working at the box office that summer, and I was in the symphony, and we kind of hit it off, and here we are with you know, 2 kids, a mortgage, and a house in Port Perry. So go
Wonderful.
figure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that worked out.
Yeah.
And the Broad Festival, it still takes place, right?
It's still going.
Do you ever go back? Do you ever go to it?
Yeah, I have been back a few times, not recently, but I did, yeah, go back.
To play or to just enjoy?
Both, actually,
okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you continued on, and you decided that music was not going to pay your lifestyle.
Correct.
So you have to make a pretty harsh decision at that point, right?
Yeah.
So
it was a mixture of not supporting the lifestyle I was looking for, but it was also not something I was enjoying anymore.
Okay.
It was becoming a chore. And what I tell people who are interested in going into music, it has to be something that
it's a passion.
It's an absolute passion.
Yeah.
And even more than that, doing anything else would make you miserable.
Right.
And it's that level of passion and commitment that's required to be successful,
right,
or to endure all the hardships and the nonsense that go along with it.
So you decided to, you went back to school for...
I did, yes. I went back to school in web development at Humber College. It was a 1-year program, which was interesting because it had an internship component to it. So, you know, I already had the skill set that I could sort of build upon. And yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity. I got into an interesting marketing agency in Toronto, and basically fanned out from there, and haven't looked back since.
And so what sort of computer stuff do you do? Or did
so
you start
I'm in the consulting space. It's a wide range of industry and clients, but a lot of stuff in marketing and advertising, social media. It really depends on the clients. Some finance stuff.
You had a connection with supermodel movie star Tyra Banks, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So one of the companies I worked for, Flixel Photos, when I came on board, had just made this partnership, and Tyra Banks was an investor in the company. And the app that we were building was featured in America's Next Top Model. Right. I think this was in 2013 or 2014.
Okay.
And so that was kind of an interesting spin to be, you know, building some software, and then it'd be on this like pretty popular TV show. Right. So, but I didn't get to meet any of the supermodels, unfortunately. Oh,
you didn't hang out with Tyra for?
No, unfortunately, I didn't get to meet her. Okay. So I was just sitting behind a screen, and unfortunately.
Oh, there's still time. And then 2019 came. You had a cold.
Yeah.
You developed a small lump on your neck, was it?
Yeah, that's right. So it was, you know, I kind of had a cold going through the family. You know, you get kind of an achy gland, and my wife Lauren was also complaining, kind of sore glands, and didn't really think much of it. And everyone's colds went away, and my sort of soreness and gland didn't. And I was telling Lauren, like, man, this thing's just like still here. And it kind of sprouted over the course of a weekend. Right. And I remember I just kind of turned my head, and it bulged out. She could see it from across the room and kind of freaked out. She's like, you got to go up to the clinic right now.
And you probably did. I'm going to hold you there.
Yeah.
Because we're going to take a break for commercial.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about the rest of that story when we come back. Please stay tuned.
Top care with top stylists. Book your next hair appointment with Port Perry's award-winning hair salon, Rosario Greco Styles. The hair experience you deserve. Book today. Call 905-985-0099.
Not all Canadians have the time nor desire to manage their finances, and often that responsibility is up to financial professionals. Our goal is to help Canadian families achieve a happy and successful financial future. Visit us, the McClellan Financial Group of Asante Capital Management.
At Voss, your independent grocer, it's all about hometown living and shopping. Owned and operated by Terry and Christine Voss, their newly renovated Port Perry store carries many local items to support our town and its residents.
Welcome back. My guest today is Marc Gibbons. Not only is he the brainchild behind the Port Perry Petals, he also has a fantastic story that we're going to get into right now. Marc, welcome back. So just before the break, you mentioned you had a cold, you had a lump, you decided to have it looked at.
I did. Well, I was compelled to go look at it, but I agreed. My wife, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went up to the walk-in clinic, and yeah, sure enough, doc didn't like the look of it, and she said, you know, I'm going to refer you to the surgeon and Dr. Stride, and we're going to, not to alarm you, but we're going to have a look. So, so a few weeks later, not even, I think maybe a week later, I was in the surgeon's office, and Dr. Stride, I mean, these are technical terms. He referred to them as big ass lymph nodes, and that he would cut them and take him out, and he would put me to sleep because he was a nice guy. And so he did, and shortly after came back positive as Hodgkin's lymphoma,
right?
Which was a bit distressing, but he almost conveyed it as good news. He was kind of worried that it was something, you know, a little more serious, and because I was pretty sick looking apparently. So he shipped me out to Oshawa at the R.S. McLaughlin Durham Regional Cancer Center.
Right.
And I met with a hematologist, and then kind of got familiar with what would happen next. And I was told it'd be chemotherapy and, you know, maybe radiation depending on what comes up in a CAT scan. So yeah, so it was, you know, it was a lesion in this lymph node that was excised. Okay. And then they sent me for a CT scan to examine the rest of the body. And sure enough, there were plenty of other tumors. Large one about almost 13 centimeters in the chest, which was a bit alarming to them. So given the size of that mass, that requires radiation post chemotherapy. Yeah, it was wrapped around sort of the aortic nerve, and so there was concern that if, you know, treatment wouldn't respond, that they would have to, you know, insert a shunt and that sort of thing. So yeah, so it was not ideal. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
To say the least. And how was your mental state over this? Like, I mean, you're young, right? You've got a young family at this point.
I mean, it's pretty distressing. A lot goes through your mind. I think there was a lot of denial for me at the time.
Right.
And
a lot of anger too, I imagine. Like, you know.
A little bit. It's just, you know, you start to sort of other yourself, like those people, like cancer, right? It's I didn't know anybody with cancer. I didn't have it in the family. So
and it's something that happens to other people, right?
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah. So I was like, well, what's this? And I kind of going into it, they're like, well, they've cut it out. Maybe they'll do a little radiation and I'll move on with life. But lo and behold, there was some pretty intense chemo to come first. And so we got started in the first treatment was in November 2019. We did 2 cycles of frontline treatment, and there's a subsequent PET scan.
Right. So just back up, because I don't think a lot of people understand. They know the word chemo.
Yeah.
But it's quite an ordeal to go through a session to receive chemo, right?
It really depends on the drugs and the person, and like the word chemo is this umbrella term.
Exactly.
Right? So the frontline treatment, the chemo is a variety of 4 different drugs.
Right.
And so yeah, there are definitely some side effects. For me, it was pretty manageable.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the frontline therapy didn't really yield the results that my hematologist was hoping for. So that meant sort of escalating the treatment to something a little more intensive. And then we thought it would be another 2 cycles, and after those 2 cycles, the scans revealed, still not great, so they hit me again. So.
Sorry, and when you say a cycle, that's how many sessions of chemo in a cycle?
So it depends on the regimen. Okay. So the first frontline therapy, the cycle had 2 treatments. It was over 28 days, so day 1, day 14. The second regimen I had was a combination of about 8 different drugs, and that was 4 in-hospital treatments over 7 days, and then there was oral chemotherapy for 7 and steroids for 14. So it was a 21-day cycle.
Okay.
So 4, in hospital over 21 days times 4.
Right.
And then the final PET scan, which was done at Princess Margaret, showed that I had, what they call full metabolic response, which is great news. So it means it's dead, and we could proceed with radiation. And I'll point out that in the middle of this, the pandemic broke out, which was a little, distressing. Yeah. One day I was in the hospital, everything was normal, we were still going on, and then the next day it was no visitors, no volunteers, no lunch, no this, so you're kind of stuck in a chair, unprepared. Yeah.
And how long were their treatments?
Well, it depended on the days. I had an allergic reaction to one of the drugs, which was pretty serious, so we had to delay the drip, so it was an 8-hour day instead of like a 3 or 4 hour day.
Right.
So that was intense. It was very tiring. But again, everything went well, and I tolerated the treatments well. I could continue to work and kind of go about.
You work from home though, right?
I do work from home, so I was very privileged to go through this experience in the line of work that I'm doing today. I basically took very little time off. Maybe the one day you're feeling a little loopy. So I was very privileged in that regard.
How did your family handle this?
It was difficult. The first round, the girls were quite young, so you know, it was just dad's going to the hospital, and they didn't really know what was going on, and I was bald. You know, for my wife, I mean, she didn't display it. I mean, she has to take the brunt of it and be brave for the whole team, and plus the pandemic. So it was very difficult for everybody. And I think, you know, we'll talk about Port Perry Petals, but you know, the campaign we supported this year is Our Cancer, and I think it's a really interesting term, Our Cancer, because it doesn't affect just the patient. I mean, it affects the person and the family member, and you know, it affects the community around that person.
During the pandemic, the added stress would be like your parents, for example, can't just drive over and see how you're doing.
That's right. I mean, we were in isolation, so we were on our own essentially. So Mark would go off to the hospital in the outside world and report back at the end of the day, hey, you know. So it was a strange, surreal time.
And at the hospital, as you said, there's no volunteers, there's nothing, so you're on your own, like totally.
Yeah, and the first day I wasn't prepared, because usually, you know, my wife would come with me and she'd go get me some lunch, and then the day I'm there 8 hours, I have no food, so and the nurses can go either. So one of my nurses, Manu, she's like, well, here's a bunch of crackers. So we just munched on those and ginger ale all day. So so that was challenging.
Well, the one thing is that the Oshawa Cancer Centre is one of the best in Canada.
It is. I have nothing but great things to say about Oshawa, and I mean, I spent a lot of time at Princess Margaret following the relapse and having to get a stem cell transplant.
Let's talk about the relapse for a second.
Yeah, so the relapse was, you know, I finished the radiation, and then, you know, there's about a year that went by, and I had quite a few symptoms during that time. And so I went for a subsequent PET scan, which revealed new evidence of disease.
Was this before or after your New Year's Day walk?
Oh, it was right around that time. Okay. So, yeah, it was an interesting story. I was walking on the Port Perry waterfront here in Palmer Park with my daughters on New Year's Eve, and we were going to the grocery store, and it was a mild day, and the girls were kind of commenting as to how it would be not a great idea to walk out on the water. And I said, you're absolutely correct. You see, there's some puddles, and the ice is pretty thin. And, you know, my oldest was like, well, look over there. There's a guy going out on the ice right now. And I says, no. And I kind of look over, and there's this guy at the end of the pier, and he's got his, you know, boombox. And sure enough, he goes over the edge. He's going for a walk, and we just heard a big crunch. And into the ice he goes. And I'm here with my kids, and I'm kind of looking around, and this guy's calling for help. And we're like, well, what do we do? So I see another man who saw what happened, and we both ran to his location and tried to pull him out. And of course, he's kind of a big boy, and he's wearing his winter coat, and he's got a gym bag, and he's got all this stuff. So we really had a hard time getting him out of the water, which we eventually did, and he was okay. But like, I really threw out my back, and it was really painful and not going away. And around the same time, I was experiencing these symptoms, and you know, then I was sent for subsequent scans, and sure enough, lots of evidence of disease. Went for a PET, lit up like a Christmas tree. So we began treatment. This was early 22, and started chemo. And the very next morning, all my back pain and neck pain completely vanished.
I've heard that from people.
So it was incredible.
20 minutes after chemo, a lot of that just boom. It's a wonder drug.
So it clearly worked.
So and then you had a stem cell transplant?
Yeah, the stem cell transplant. So this was done at Princess Margaret.
They used your own.
Yeah, so it's an autologous stem cell transplant. So they collect your own stem cells. Then they do what's called high dose chemo. So basically destroy your bone marrow and bring you to the edge of death, essentially, and then reinfuse your stem cells. And then they engraft, and then your blood production and
I was intrigued by, before we went on the air, the way you were explaining about the process of getting the stem cell done. Like it's not an easy process.
Yeah, I call it the harvest. So you get tied up to this machine, and before you get these injections to mobilize the stem cells from your bone marrow. And so you got one in, one out, and you sit tethered to this machine for 8 hours, and you have a week to complete it. You can't do it all at once. They need 5 million cells. So I was fortunate to do it over 2 days. So that was kind of step one in that process, and then you're admitted, and the whole process in hospital is almost a month.
And this is during the pandemic.
This is also during the pandemic, but kind of things were relaxed a little bit. So I did the treatment at Princess Margaret, the high dose, then the transplant, and then I was transferred back to Oshawa, and then did my 2 weeks recovery there, just a little bit, almost.
And then you went out and rode a bike for 100 kilometers.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, my hematologist at Princess Margaret, she was telling me, you know, you're going to be bedridden for probably 3 months. Like, you're not going to be up to much. And
she didn't know you, did she?
No. And, you know, I kind of set myself an objective. By the end of this summer, I'm going to ride 100 kilometers. And I was feeling not bad. And I just went out one day and, you know, I tried, you know, 20, 30, and I went out another time, 8 days out of hospital, and I rode like 110K to Beaverton and back. And
good for you.
And, you know, I was kind of, you know, sticking it to the man, but yeah, it was cool. So biking has definitely helped me through this whole cancer journey.
Hence the Port Perry Pedals, which is a group raising money for a PET scanner. And a PET scanner is a full body scan that they do before and during cancer treatment for the OSHA for Durham Region.
Correct.
Right? So this is your third year doing the pedals?
This was year 3. We just concluded.
And you raised over $50,000 this year?
Yeah, so our 3-year combined is just over 113,000, so 53 this year.
Wow,
perhaps a little bit more. We've got to consolidate our expenses, so we're feeling really good about that. It is, as you say, for the PET scanner, which is a critical piece of equipment in the cancer journey, which we don't have in the region. So our patients at the Durhan Regional Cancer Center either go to Princess Margaret or Sunnybrook, and sometimes as far as Ottawa, depending on availability and how urgently somebody needs the scan. So this is going to be a huge deal for us in Durham.
Our time has come to an end, unfortunately. It goes very quickly. It's an amazing story. I just wanted to cap it by saying that your latest results show that you are metabolically remission.
Yes.
Totally clear.
Yes.
And so the future will look great.
We certainly hope so.
I did the pedals with you guys this year. Almost killed me. I didn't do the 100 kilometers.
Well, there's always next year.
There's always next year. I'll be older.
Yes.
But Mark, thank you so much for being
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your story. It's pleasure. Amazing.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Please join us here every month for the story behind the person on Rogers TV.
Gonna take the old one eye to the optometrist.
Did that well. Did that well, didn't
That was a good clap.
Say when. The brainchild behind Port Perry Pedals.
Hold up. Sorry.
that phone right there buzzed.
Yeah, it's fine.
Can you make it not buzz? Or do you keep it buzzing?
Is it your show or mine? That's fine.
I don't know.
No, it's fine.
I'm just trying to help.
The mics don't pick it up.
I'm just trying to help.
The mics don't pick it up. Okay.